What's up, y'all? This is BoxingWave. Let's talk Keith Thurman against Leonard Bundu this weekend on the undercard of the Devon Alexander Amir Khan fight. I wasn't gonna do a prediction video. Someone asked me to do one. Leonard Bundu. I went back and I watched this fight against Frankie Gavin. I watched the fight against Lee Purdy. You know, Bundu is a guy. He holds a European title. Fighter from Spain. He's like 40 years old. You know, undefeated. He does got good boxing skills. Okay, he definitely does have some decent boxing skills, but I just don't think he's on a world level. Even with him in his experience, I just don't think he's on a world level, and he hasn't fought anybody really on a world level. I think Frankie Gavin is a good, solid fighter, but I don't think he's really that great. You know, he was able to beat him, but I just don't think Frankie Gavin is that great. And I think Frankie Gavin could have beaten him. You know, if he stuck to, you know, keeping Bundu on the end of his jab and stayed off the ropes, he could have beat Bundu. You know, Lee Purdy is a fighter that stood right in front of Bundu, you know. But Gavin used some movement, but he just didn't use enough. And he didn't keep that jab pumping. And I think he could, you know, Bundu is a shorter fighter. As a welterweight, he's a shorter fighter. He does have speed. He does have good lateral movement, you know, but he just doesn't really. He does a lot. He throws a lot of feints, you know, unnecessary feints, and he switches his stance constantly throughout the rounds. You know, he has that irky jerky. It's hard to. He has a weird rhythm to him, and it's hard to really time him, but. It's not really effective to me. You know, I'm watching him in his fights and I'm like, he's doing too much to me, in my opinion. He doesn't really utilize the jab neither, you know. He might throw one out there just to close the distance. But outside of that, he doesn't have a lot of power neither. If you look at his KO position, it's really kind of low. So he was able to do some good body work against Frankie Gavin. He dropped him with a body shot in that fight, but outside of that, I really don't see him being a threat. I think Chaves was more of a threat to Keith Thurman. I think Chaves. I think Soto Carras was more of a threat to Keith Thurman. Stylistically, I just don't see what Bundu has in store for Keith Thurman. You know, Keith Thurman is a guy that has youth, speed, power in both hands. Okay, he could fight moving forward, backwards. I haven't seen, in those two fights that I've seen of Bundu, I haven't really seen him getting pressured and fighting on his back foot. I haven't really seen that, you know. Like I said, he has good body. You know, he throws to the body pretty well. But I just don't know, you know, even when he's on the inside with Keith Thurman, that's where he's going to get hit. You know, Keith Thurman fights pretty good on the inside as well. And I don't think this is a step up for Keith Thurman. I mean, the guy definitely has some good boxing skills and everything. And I know the guy is undefeated. But these guys that he's, you know, I know Soto Carras has a lot of losses, but Soto Carras has been there with a lot of good fighters. Whereas Bundu really hasn't fought any world-class fighters yet. You know, I think he holds a European title, but he just haven't shown me anything. You know, I don't see how he could be a threat to Keith Thurman. And I can't even say he really has a puncher's chance because he's not a huge puncher. So, you know, I think Keith Thurman, I think the first round, I think Keith Thurman it possibly might have some trouble with his movement, you know, and his rhythm early. But I say by the second or third round, I wouldn't be surprised if Thurman hurts him by the second round and gets him out of there by the third round. You know, this is a fight that Keith Thurman should look good in. You know, I'll be very surprised. Like, I think Keith Thurman is going to win, but I'll be very surprised if Keith Thurman isn't going to win by like a knockout. You know, I just don't see Keith Thurman losing, but if he doesn't win by a knockout or like maybe like by like a 7th round knockout, I'll be very, very shocked. Like, this is a fight. I think Keith Thurman's been in there with a lot better fighters in my opinion. You know, even though they have losses on their records. You know, I think Bundu was a step down for Thurman, even with Julio Diaz. Julio Diaz, who's been in there with a lot of fighters, gave Shawn Porter 2 good fights. You know, gave Amir Khan a good fight. Thurman was able to go in there and beat him with ease. Okay, Thurman has so many weapons, so much power in both hands. He has a lot of power in his lead hand. You know, with that leaping uppercut he does with his left hand and his left hook. There's a lot of power behind those punches. He has just a large arsenal of weapons in his game, and I just don't see Bundu standing a chance. He doesn't have anything for Keith Thurman. You know, guys for Keith Thurman that I think is at welterweight that'd be troubling for Keith Thurman is Kell Brook. Now, I always say Kell Brook is going to be a guy that's going to be a tough fight for Keith Thurman. You know, maybe Devon Alexander. You know, I don't think Amir Khan would be. I think Amir Khan's style is tailor-made for Keith Thurman. You know, anyone with a strong left hook with a lot of power behind it, Khan does not, you know, especially not southpaw orthodox fighters, Khan will get put to sleep by Keith Thurman, without a doubt. But I see Kell Brook, maybe Devon Alexander, giving Keith Thurman some problems, especially Kell Brook. You know, outside of Floyd, you know, Floyd obviously is a better fighter, but Floyd doesn't have huge power, but he definitely could outbox Keith Thurman. But Kell Brook has that right hand that I see could give. That's why I want to see that fight. I want to see that more than the Shawn Porter fight. You know, I think Shawn Porter doesn't really have the style for Keith Thurman either. And Bundu, this would be a easy night for Keith Thurman. Hopefully he'll get a good fight after this fight is over, because he should definitely be able to knock out Bundu. All right. So anyway, that's my prediction. I'm done. I did like 4 videos today. Be on the lookout. I'll do some more. There's some more fights coming up this weekend. You got the Matt Carball, Andy Lee fight coming up. I didn't do a prediction video for that, but I've done other prediction videos for fights this weekend. I did Lara and Ishe Smith. I did Bradley and Chaves. I did Alexander and Amir Khan. I'll probably throw some of those links in the description of this video, alright? So be on the lookout for those and more videos on the way this week, alright? So I'll check you guys later. Peace.